Hey everyone, it's Jay here. So before I get in today's video, I'm just gonna say please give this video a thumbs up and also go follow me on Instagram because that's where all my other content is gonna be. I'm also gonna be posting more of my covers on Instagram, so please, after you watch this video, don't go away now, but after you watch this video, please go give me a follow on Instagram and I post all different kinds of content there. But anyway, in today's video, I'm going to be showing off my record collection of 2022. Now, I collected a lot of records this year. Even though I just moved here, I recently just did some, I recently just got some records for Christmas, but today I'm just going to show you off my CD and record collection of 2022. So with that said, I'm just going to get into it. So first, we got Def Leppard's, oh, this is upside down. Sorry guys, Def Leppard's Pyromania. Now this is one of my all-time favorite 80s albums. Definitely a banger album. I would have to say my favorite track, my top 3 favorite songs off this album would be Rock Till You Drop, Photograph, and Stage Fright. Also Too Late for Love. Those have to be my top favorite tracks off this album. But yes, definitely a banger album. Next up, we got Kiss, Love Gun. Definitely one of my all-time favorite albums. Again, this is definitely a banger Kiss album, I would have to say my favorite tracks off this album would be Love Gun, the title track, Shock Me, and I Stole Your Love. But really, this is another banger album. Next up, we got Kiss's Destroyer. Definitely another banger Kiss album. If you're trying to get into Kiss, I would recommend listening to this album. And I would have to say my favorite track off of this album would have to be Detroit Rock City, also Flamin' Youth. Those would have to be my 2 favorite tracks off of this album, but this is definitely a banger Kiss album. Next up, we got Van Halen, 1984. Definitely a banger. I love, if you're trying to get into Van Halen, you cannot go wrong with this album. And, you definitely can't go wrong with this album. I would have to say my favorite track off of this album would probably have to be the classic Panama. Because why not? It's a banger classic. But yes, I just love this album. Next up, we got the Rolling Stones, Sticky Fingers. And I haven't really listened to this record as much, but I do like the Rolling Stones. I would have to say my favorite track off of this album would have to be Can't You Hear Me Knockin', also Wild Horses. But I do like this album though. Next up, we got Green Day's Dookie. Now, as I said, this is one of the albums that got me into punk and rock music. If it wasn't for this album, I wouldn't even be playing the guitar if it wasn't for this album. It's hard to choose a favorite track off of this album, but definitely one of my all-time favorites. Next up, we got the Runaways, 1976. Really, now this album is really underrated. I really love this album. The Runaways, such a great band, especially if it's going to feature all females. It's definitely a banger. This is probably pretty basic, but my favorite track off of this album would be Cherry Bomb. Next, we got the Ramones debut album. Okay, who can go wrong with the Ramones, right? The Ramones, definitely one of the first punk bands I ever listened to in my entire life. They changed everything. They literally changed my life. They inspired me to become a musician. Now, my favorite song off of this album would probably be Today Your Love, Tomorrow the World. That would have to be my favorite song off of this album. Next up, we got Rocket to Russia again. Now, as I said, I love the Ramones. You guys know I love the Ramones. Now, I would have to say my favorite track off of this album would be... Well, I have a lot of favorites. I would just have to say Rockaway Beach, Teenage Lobotomy, and Do You Want to Dance. Next, we got Road to Ruin. So as I said, I'd rather not get into full detail about this album. I like this album. But yeah, I would have to say my favorite tracks off of this album would be basically I Want to Be Sedated, I'm Against It, and She's the One. Next up, we got Cheap Trick, Heaven and Tonight. Now, Cheap Trick, definitely one of the best 70s bands. I would have to say my favorite song off of this album would have to be Surrender. Next up, we got Van Halen 1. Now, as I said, I love Van Halen. And my favorite track off of this album would have to be Jamie's Crying, also Ain't Talking About Love. Next up, we got Aerosmith, Permanent Vacation. Now, this is definitely one of my all-time favorite 80s albums. Favorite albums from 1987. My favorite track off of this album would be Heart's Done Time, Magic Touch, Ragdoll, and Dude Looks Like a Lady. Those are just my top favorite tracks off of this album, especially Dude Looks Like a Lady. That's probably my favorite Aerosmith song. Next up, we got Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction. Now, this is definitely one of the first rock albums I ever listened to. My favorite track off of this album would be It's So Easy, Paradise City. Well, actually, I have a lot of favorite tracks off of this album, but yeah, those would be my top two off of this album. Also, now Open Up and Say Ah by Poison. Now, I do like Poison, you know, they're one of my all-time favorite 80s hair bands. Now, my favorite tracks off of this album would be Nothing But a Good Time, Look But You Can't Touch, and Fallen Angel. And lastly, but not least, I got Joan Jett's I Love Rock and Roll. Now, I love Joan Jett. She's one of my favorite female artists. My favorite track off of this album would be Love Is Pain and Crimson and Clover. And now we got through the records. Now I'm going to go through my CD collection. So first we got Alice Cooper, Trash. Now, this has probably got to be my favorite Alice Cooper album. My favorite track off of this album would be Bed of Nails and House of Fire. Next up, we got Kiss, Rock and Roll Over. Now, I would have to say this has probably got to be Kiss's well, in my opinion, this is probably Kiss's one of the most underrated albums. I would have to say my favorite track off of this album would be Calling Dr. Love, Mr. Speed, and Love 'Em, Leave 'Em, and Making Love. There's just so many great tracks off of this album. Next up, we got Dynasty. Now, you know, even though the most well-known off of this track was I Was Made for Loving You, but there's so many great tracks off of this album. I would have to say my favorite track off of this album would have to be 2000 Man, Magic Touch, and but this is definitely an underrated album by Kiss other than I Was Made for Loving You. Next up, we got Ramones. Now, this is a compilation album, so I'm not going to get full into detail with that. But we also got Ramones, Leave Home. And my favorite track off of this album would probably have to be Susie Is a Headbanger. Green Day's American Idiot, definitely one of the most punk albums in history. I would have to say my favorite track off of this album would have to be Jesus of Suburbia. Queens of Noise, The Runaways. I also got Joan Jett, Bad Reputation. We also got Kiss's debut album. You guys probably know I have a whole Kiss collection because I'm probably becoming you guys know I'm becoming a huge Kiss fan, but yes, Kiss's debut album, you cannot go wrong with this. My favorite track off of this album would probably have to be Strutter and Firehouse, yes. Next up, we got Poison, Look What the Cat Dragged In. Definitely one of my favorite 80s hair metal albums. My favorite tracks off of this album would have to be I Want Action, Look What the Cat Dragged In, title track, Talk Dirty to Me, and Cry Tough. Those are my favorite off of this album. Next we got Motley Crue, Girls, Girls, Girls. I love Motley Crue. My favorite track off of this album would have to be the title track, Girls, 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 Wild Side, Dancing on Glass, and 5 Years Dead. And last but not least, we have Van Halen 2. Now, yes, I have 3 Van Halen albums, 2 on vinyl and just 1 on CD. My favorite would have to be, off of this album, would have to be Dance the Night Away. So yeah, guys, there you have it. That is my CD and record collection of 2022. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And as I said earlier, please go follow me on all my social medias. Follow me on Instagram because I'm going to be posting more content on there. I'm also going to be posting more covers and stuff on my Instagram. So again, please go give me a follow on there. So there you have it. It's Jay signing off.